Hey everyone, welcome back. Running a few minutes late, apologize for that. For some reason, Periscope couldn't find me a connection. I don't know what the issue was, but hopefully it's resolved now. Alright, so welcome back to session 2 of National Story Planning Day. I'm your host, JenniferBlanchard, so I'm an author and a story coach. I work with serious emerging novelists who want to save time and cut years off their learning curve so they can write better stories and get published faster. And it's very sunny where I'm at today, apparently. So for anyone who's just joining the event today, if you want to get the workbook that we're using to plan our story for the day, you can go to this link right here, bit.ly/storyworkbook. And it's a workbook that I'm basically walking you through each section during the videos that I'm doing. And you can ask questions and get, guidance on what you're working on. But this is the link to get the workbook for today's event. Okay, so in last session, I talked about your idea, concept, premise, which is really the foundation of your story. And so if you did the session previously, you started working on your idea, concept, premise. And if not, then that's something you can do after this session. So how I'm doing today's events is I'm doing 4 Periscopes that start at 2 p.m. today and go on until the final one starts at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. And how I'm doing that is doing a little bit of content, going through what's in the workbook, and then you can ask questions. And then I give you about an hour or so to do some of the work and then come back for the next session. And it's kind of like a little virtual workshop. So like I said, last time we talked about idea, concept, premise, and now I'm going to talk to you about character. So as you've started to develop your story, your concept, premise, and that's really the foundation of your story. But now you need to bring in some characters. And most especially, you need to bring in 2 very important characters. Your protagonist, which is your main character, your good guy, and your antagonist, which is your bad guy, the one who's going to be squaring off against your protagonist in the story. So when it comes to your protagonist, there are 4 things you want to know about them. First, you want to know what their inner demons are. So you want to know, what is this character struggling with internally? So inner demons are usually just things that other people would consider to be a flaw. So being a perfectionist, being a control freak, having fear of some kind, being an egotistical person, thinking you're better than other people. I mean, there's a lot of options for, having anxiety. There's a lot of options for what your inner demon could be for your character. But the idea is you want an inner demon that's going to be something that the character has to battle with and overcome by the end of the story. And this will tie into how the antagonist is dealing, what they're dealing with their antagonist. So the second thing you want to know is your character's goal. So what is their goal in the story? Every character, especially your main character, hi, thanks for joining. Your main character wants something, so every character in a story, but especially your protagonist, wants something. And whatever this character wants, they're either going to get it by the end of the story or they're not. But you want to decide what it is that they want. And then 3, you want to know their backstory. So how did this person become who they are today? What's happened to them in their past that's causing them to have the inner demons that they have, act a certain way, all that stuff. How am I? I am great. I'm super excited about today, about National Story Planning Day. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this. And so it's exciting. I'm glad to have people participating, and I hope that it's really helpful. So okay, with your protagonist, the 4th thing you want to know is their character arc. So how are they going to change from beginning to end in your story? And character arc ties into your inner demon. So basically, how is this character going to overcome the inner demon that you've given them, starting from the beginning of the story, introducing us to what the inner demon is, and then how are they going to overcome it by the end of the story and have defeated it. So as an example, in my novel, Soundcheck, that I published this year, my character's inner demon is that she's a control freak. So she's always trying to control everything around her, situations. She's always doing things because she's very, perfectionist tendency, but a lot of that just comes from being very controlling. And so she's not good at letting go of control. When things start getting out of her hands, she doesn't like it. And so, of course, I gave her a situation to deal with in the story that's going to test this part of her and going to try to stop her from being a control freak because nothing is in her control at that point. And so she really has to rely on, getting help from other people and all this stuff. And so by the end of the story, she's learned that if she stays the way she is, if she continues to be a control freak, she's never going to have what she wants. And so she lets loose. By the end of the story, she's overcome this and she's able to ask for help. She's able to do things she wouldn't have done in the beginning of the story. And that's how you know she completed her character arc. So again, just to recall or re-go through them. The 4 things you want to know about your protagonist: their inner demon or demons, if there's several, their backstory. You want to know what their goal in the story is, and you want to know their character arc, so how they're going to change. And now the second character that you want to know about in your story is your antagonist. So that's your bad guy. And there are 3 important things you want to know about this character. The first is, of course, their goal. So what's the goal in the story? Every character, especially, like I said, your main characters, so your antagonist and your protagonist, they have a goal. So your antagonist wants something, and whatever it is this character wants, that's what they're going after in the story. So that's their goal. The second thing you want to know is their backstory. So how did this character become who they are today? Now, a lot of the backstory, especially for your antagonist, won't actually show up in your story, but you need to know the backstory so that you can write this character in a compelling way. Now, the third thing you want to know about your bad guy is why they want to oppose your protagonist. So there has to be a reason or a motivation for them opposing what your protagonist wants, why they're, trying to defeat them or stop them from getting what they want, and all of that stuff. So in the workbook that I've given you, and here's the link for anyone who's just joining, bit.ly/storyworkbook. You can download a copy of it for you to work through with all of us. But I've given you a bunch of space in here to be able to brainstorm about your protagonist and your antagonist. But before I send you off to go and work on that, I just wanted to give you a couple of other things that you should probably think about. In the next session, I'm going to talk about story structure. But before you can get your story structure figured out, and before you can really feel confident about it, there are a few other things you want to think about. And so those are also in the workbook. They're under the page Don't Forget About. And so I just wanted to kind of talk through them right now. So those 4 things are what point of view are you going to use to tell your story? So obviously you have to choose a point of view, and the point of view you choose is going to help dictate what type of scenes you're using in your story and how you're telling the story narration-wise. So 3 of the main voices that are used, and of course there are more than just these. These are the 3 main ones that I see. First person, so either first person present or first person past. And same thing with third person limited, which means we're seeing a limited narration of the story, or third person omniscient, which means we're seeing everything. So we're seeing what all the characters think, what they all, are doing, or if it's limited, we're only seeing some of it, or we're seeing only certain characters. And then first person, obviously, we're only seeing the perspective of your main character, so your protagonist. So you want to decide which of these you're going to use in your story. The next thing you want to know about is your theme. So what is the message or the theme that you're trying to convey with this story? Now, you may not know this yet. For me, the theme really came through strongly after I finished my first draft of my novel. So for me, I just try to kind of have an idea of theme, but I don't normally nail it down until I'm, done with my draft. So, but that's just something to be thinking about because, again, that's going to tie into your scenes that you come up with. The next thing is your secondary characters. So obviously you have your antagonist and your protagonist, but you're also going to need a secondary layer of characters that are going to basically support your main cast. So these would be people like mentors, friends, family members, anybody who's going to be involved in your story on a secondary level. And then you may have third level characters. Those are ones who don't usually have names or backstories. They're just people who, run the register when your character goes to a store or, waits on their table if they're eating at a restaurant. Those are the third level characters. Those ones you really, I think, develop as you're doing your writing of the draft. So for those, I say, you might know of some, but probably those will be more when you're writing. But right now you want to be thinking of your secondary level characters. So who else is going to be in your main, story realm? And then you also want to be thinking about, and this is probably one of the more important things, which is why I gave you a whole page in the workbook to work through it, and that would be your subplots. So in a story, you have your main core story, which is tied into your story structure, and then you have subplots. And so subplots are basically side storylines that still involve your protagonist, but that show us a different dimension of the character. So, for example, if you're writing a murder mystery, your core story is, figuring out the murder mystery, but you might have a subplot love story, so that we can see a softer side of your character. Or maybe you'll have a subplot side story about the character and her relationship with her father. So there's other subplots you can kind of come up with that will show us different dimensions of your protagonist. Now, with subplots, be careful to have not too many of them because it can get very confusing and overwhelming for readers. So I recommend 1 to 2 subplots, 3 at most. Any more than that, and it really gets hard to keep them all straight and pay attention to them all. And you're really, I think, taking away from the effectiveness of your story if you have too many. So But these are the things you want to be thinking about before you move on to story structure. So if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat box now. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap up this session and let you go work on your character planning. For anyone who's just joining, bit.ly/story workbook, grab the National Story Planning Day workbook so you can do a story plan for your NaNoWriMo novel. And anyone who's doing National Novel Writing Month starting on next Sunday, can you believe it's already next Sunday? I can't believe how fast this year has gone. But yeah, so National Novel Writing Month is totally awesome. It's a great event for motivation. It's a great event for sitting your ass in a chair and doing your writing. But the problem is, if you don't know your story ahead of time, if you haven't thought about it enough or planned it out, you're going to end up disappointed with the draft you have because it's not going to be an actual story. It's most likely going to be an episodic narrative of a character's life, and then you have to now go back and turn it into a story. And what a pain. You don't want to do that. That is a waste of time. So plan your story out now, and even if you do the bare minimum, so everything in this workbook that I'm giving you today, and again, here's the link, is the bare minimum things you should know about your story before you write it. So if you do all the exercises, you will walk away from today with a basic story plan that you can use for your nano novel or for any story that you write from now into the future. So bit.ly/story workbook to grab the workbook. All right, well, I'm wrapping this session up, so I will be back at 5 p.m. Eastern to talk about the next section of topics, which is story structure. And this is a very important topic, so you want to make sure you've got your characters in place and your plot and everything before you move on to that section. So you take the next hour or so to just work on that, and I will be back at 5 p.m. to dive into the next topic. Thanks for joining me, and I will catch you in a little bit.